Hi there. In this tutorial I just want to go over the basics of animation. A number of people have requested it, so I thought I'd just show you the basics of how to create some animations and how to render them into a video file as well. So to start with, we'll add just some basic objects and we'll go through how you animate them. So I'll add a cube and we'll have a look at how to move that around in an animation. You'll notice that we've got a timeline down the bottom here, and when we press play, that green line moves across to the right. These are frames. An animation is made up obviously of many frames, and you eventually end up rendering those into a video file. So at the moment I've got it set to 250 and I've got a little cube here. So what we'll do is we'll start the cube over here, and if I come over to here, this setting here, you can see a number of parameters associated with the cube are listed here. So we've got rotation, its location in the 3D world, and its scale. Pretty much any parameter that you can get to, you are able to animate. The main key that you will use for that is I. To demonstrate this, we'll set the frame to 0, which we're already at, or 1 rather, and I'm going to hover my mouse over the location area and press I. Once I press I, we get a yellow background appear on here. Nothing's going to happen yet because we now need to move the thing. Now if I move it first and then start to move the progress bar, you'll notice it jumps back again. So what I need to do is move the progress bar to where I want the next part of the animation to be and then move it. Now traditionally, in the very early days of animation, stop frame animation, you would only go forward 1 or 2 frames, move your object a little bit, record that, and then go a few more frames forward, move it a little bit more, and so on. Thankfully, in the days of computers, we don't have to do that. We can skip a lot of the frames and the computer will work out what position the objects were in the in-between frames. It's called tweening. So if we go up to, say, frame 50, and then we move our cube somewhere else, we'll put it there. You notice this area is green. All that's telling us is that there is a keyframe, and you can see it by this little yellow line here, and that until we place another keyframe, that's the default position to the cube. So I'll hover over here and I'll press I. Now if I go back to the beginning, cube jumps back to there, and I press play, and you notice the cube moves to that new location. So there's a very simple animation, and what we could do is we could say, well, if I go back to that keyframe, by the way, these little play and reverse and forward buttons here, these ones jump to the end and the beginning of the animation. These ones in here will jump between keyframes. So if I go back to frame 50, hover my mouse over rotation now, and then go to, say, frame 100, and we'll rotate on the y-axis a bit. Press the keyframe on that. Now we go back to the beginning, and it will move to that position and then rotate. So that's a very simple animation. That's one of the basic ways you can do it. I'm going to cover the transferring this into a video file toward the end. So the next thing we might want to do is actually distort shapes. But before we do that, I think what we'll do is we'll add a cone, a very simple shape. Then we'll add a cube, make that a bit smaller, and we'll put it just above the cone, and we'll add a sphere. Now there are various ways of joining these together such that we can then animate them independently. Now obviously I could just move these around, adding keyframes as we go, but I might want them to operate as if they are connected, or to actually connect them. So to do that, I would join them together. So what I'll do first of all is literally join them together. If I press T, I bring up this menu on the side. I've selected all 3 of the items and I'll click join. So they're now effectively one item, even though it's 3 different primitives. And now I'm going to add an armature, and it will be a single bone. Now it's hidden underneath there at the moment. So if I come over to here with the bone selected and go to display and I select X-ray, that actually helps because I can now see the bone wherever it is, even if it's hidden, and you can do that with anything. So I'm now going to scale the bone up so it's roughly the same size as my object. So if I un-X-ray it, you can see it is inside the object at the moment. I think what I'll also do is I'll add some colour to that object just to make it a little easier to see. Right. So with my bone selected, go into edit mode, press W and subdivide, and we'll go one more on the subdivision. So effectively I've now got 3 bones. And if I just alter the scales a little bit and the positions, what I'm doing is I'm making the bones effectively map to this shape underneath. Now the thing about bones is they join at these ends, but what you can do is you can move them around and they will remain connected to each other. So for example, we go down here with the bone selected or armature selected and we go to pose mode. Now if I press R and rotate, you'll notice this is rotating around the other one, so I'll leave it straight. In fact, now I'll select the next one down, rotate that, and you notice the top one goes around with it. And obviously if I do the same with the bottom one, they all rotate with it. So I now need to make this bone affect, this armature rather, affect this shape. Before I do that though, what I'm going to do is move that to another layer because it makes it a bit easier to work with. So there's the bone and there's the object, and then I click, holding shift down, I'll click here, and that basically displays both layers at once. Next thing I'm going to do, select my object, then select the bone, Control P, and you get more parenting options than normal. And I'm now going to say armature deform with automatic weight. So I'm parenting, that's what Control P does, but I'm adding effectively an armature with automatic weights. So now I'll just go back and select my bone again, and I'll go back into pose mode, we'll select the top one and we'll rotate that one and see what happens. And there we go, it's just rotating the sphere. And now I'll select the next one down, rotate that, and that rotates the sphere and the cube, and of course the bottom one rotates everything. And that's worked very well, and that's just what we wanted. However, we don't necessarily have to have separate shapes. So if I delete this object now, and we'll add a new object, and we'll make this a cylinder. So I'll just go to, I'll make sure it's in the separate layer, just to make things easier, and we'll scale it up on the Z-axis. That should roughly do it, so we'll bring in the armature layer again. If I go to orthographic, we can see a bit more clearly what we're doing. Okay, so what if I parent this? Now bear in mind, if I go into edit mode, you can see that we've got vertices at the bottom and vertices at the top, but none in the middle as yet. So if I now parent this, if we come out of pose mode, if I parent the cylinder to the armature, Control P, and we'll say with automatic weights, and now I'll go and select the armature and pose mode. So what's going to happen? Let's find out. It doesn't do what we expected it to do. It actually, if I look from this angle, it's actually just distorting the top relative to the bottom. And the simple reason for that is because we don't have any vertices for it to work on. So if we remove that parenting, I'll just check that that's been, yep. So if we now, before we parent it, go into edit mode and add some loops in there, so it's now got a lot more vertices. Come out of edit mode, select the armature, Control P, and parent it with automatic weights. Select the armature and go to pose mode, and now we'll try it again. And now you'll notice it's doing much more what you might have expected or hoped that it would do. It's distorting the cylinder in a way that you would want. And in case it's not obvious, what I can do is I can keyframe the rotations on this armature, so on every element, every bone in this armature. so I can tell it what the individual rotations, you see them changing. I should have said that this is the whole armature, so it's not going to necessarily change anything here when I alter this. It will if I alter the location or rotation of the whole armature, but if you click the little bone symbol here, you'll notice each bone has its own name. So the bottom one is called bone, the next one is bone 02, and the top one's bone 01. And you'll notice parameters here are altering. The exact format for these parameters depends on what we select here, so you could just select that and then you get an X, Y, Z as before. But it doesn't really matter for our purposes. So I could, for example, keyframe that, then come over to the 50th frame, rotate, and perhaps rotate this one that way, keyframe that, and then come up to the 100th frame. I missed a keyframe there, and the reason I missed a keyframe was because I only keyframed the one bone. I didn't keyframe both. So I'd need to go back to here, rotate that up again. Now that I've got that bone selected, you notice it's green. I can keyframe that. So if we now, and the same is true for here, I straighten it up and add a keyframe for that one there. And now we play that and we can see we're getting some alterations. And so all of these will affect the mesh in various different ways, and we can distort the mesh however we want to. And once you're happy, you can either, depending on whether you're creating a still scene or whatever, but obviously this is about animations, you can use that armature to distort whatever you like. And obviously typically people build whole armatures to animate an entire shape, a humanoid or whatever animal shape, and there's a lot of complexities associated with that, and you can add controls and things like that. Last thing I'm going to show you about the actual basics of animation, in fact we'll just reload the startup file, is to do with shape keys. So if we add a mesh, and we will add a cube, and I'm just going to add some vertices into it just so we've got something that we can play with. Now I can animate this cube in all sorts of different ways, but very often, particularly if you're doing a shape and things like that, you might want to have specific deformations which you can call on or vary in their degree. So what we can do is come over to vertices and add shape keys, but before you add any, you need to add the basics. So in other words, the default position from which all the deformations occur. So we go into the shape and we press plus, and that gives our basis, so that's where we're starting from. Then we click plus again and we've got the first shape key. I can go into edit mode now, and let's say I select these two vertices. I've got proportional editing selected, and I scale that on the X to something like that. And that now is that shape key, and you can see that as I needed to turn that on so that it would work in edit mode, and we can see there's a value here, and as we turn that value up and down, that shape key transitions from the basis, which is no deformation, to the shape that I added. You can increase that between the values that you put in here. So if I set this to 2, I can actually go all the way up beyond 1 to 2, and you can see it's going further even though I didn't distort it there. And obviously that could be less. But the key point is that I can now animate that. So for example, I could come up to frame 10, press I over there, come up to frame 30, increase the shape key, I there, come out to 60, put it down to halfway, I there, and then come out to 100 and set it back to 0, and I there. So if we now come out of edit mode and play that, we can see the shape distorting with the animation. One of the other things I need to show regarding animation is the graph editor. So I'll add a cube, and what I think I'll do is we'll add a few more surfaces, not too many though, and we'll just delete a couple of faces, and then let's just open that up like that. So it's like a little, almost a cylinder, I suppose. And now I'm going to add an icosphere. So it's capable of passing through there. So I'll now put my sphere up here. So I'm at the beginning, we'll come to here and I'll record the position of the sphere there. So we'll then move it over to frame 30, bring the sphere to here, record that position, take it over to 60, make sure it's going to go through, adjust the position a bit and take it through, record that, and finally at 90 we'll just take it down there somewhere. So if we now play this very simple animation, we can see the sphere comes through and drops down. However, you may notice that it speeds up and then slows down, speeds up, slows down in a very smooth sort of fashion, which may well be what you want, or it may not. The next thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to move this to the point where the sphere is just passing through. I'm going to select this object that I created and I'm going to record the rotation. Then I'm going to go to the beginning of the animation and I'm going to rotate it on the Z-axis 90. And we'll go back up, we'll go up to 90 and again rotate Z 90 and record that. So now if we play, it opens up, it goes through, it closes again. But if you look very carefully, I'll just set this such that the whole animation is 100 long, and then it'll keep repeating for us. So we can see that this sort of smoothly rotates, lets the ball through, and then smoothly rotates back. And that may be what we want, but what if we want it to move in a very sharp way, so there's no gradual acceleration and then slowing down? The reason I think they default to the gradual acceleration is because that's the most likely to use, but it's by no means the only way to do it. So if we open a new window and we go to the graph editor, depending on what object we've got selected, we will actually get a graph up here, and the graph is showing, for those elements for which we've added keyframes, it shows you how the parameters on those keyframes are changing. So you can see this green line moving, and you can see it's a fairly gradual line, but we can change that. We've got it selected already because the object's selected, and we can go down to here and we can go to interpolation mode, and we can say linear. And with linear, you notice it's very sharp, there's no gradual acceleration and deceleration, it just immediately starts to move. So if we now start that, and you can see again it's not fast, but it's much more mechanical, I suppose. And we could do the same to the ball. So I zoom in a bit here and you can certainly see that they're fairly gradual changes, and we can go into here and change this to linear as well, and let's see what difference that makes. And we play that and you can see it's a much jerkier movement, which may be what you want or it may not. So there's different modes that you can use there. You can use Bezier curves and actually set the curve yourself so it can speed up and slow down. So that is the graph editor, and the final thing that you need to know about for the basics of animation is the dope sheet. So if we look here, I'll just zoom in a little bit, we can see all these little dots, and these little dots are representing all the keyframes for all the objects in the scene, and currently they're all selected. But if I deselect them and then using the normal controls that you would use to modify an object, so that's G to grab and move things, or B to box select and so on, we can move some of these things that they're doing around. So if we go for the cube, which is this item, and we know that those middle keyframes are representing the cube rotating. So what if we delayed it? So press B and box select. This is where the cube moves, and if we minimize this is showing each individual parameter, but we can just look at the overall parameters for the cube. So this is where the cube rotates to open, as it were, and this is where it rotates back to closed. And we know that the ball is moving because here is the points at which it was moving from one place to another. So if we now press G and delay that, so I'll put it, say, there, and go back to the beginning, we can now see that the cube doesn't quite do it right. Perhaps it does still make it because we've slowed it down, or of course I can move it to be much sooner. So then we press play and you notice it's already trying to close by the time the ball comes through. So that's a quick way to move where the keyframes are, and as I said, you can see the keyframes represented here for the object you have selected. So if we close that now, so you've got an animation and you want to render it. You have a number of options here. Obviously I'm not going to go into the rendering itself here. Cycles is my preferred and was certainly designed for making this sort of thing, but you can use Blender Render just as easily. It's whatever you would normally have used for a simple render, but now you use the animation option. But obviously you do need to set where it's going to output it, so you need to set the output location here, and then you need to determine what format it's going to output it in. If it's just a very, very quick short render and each frame doesn't take very long to render, you can output it into, say, an AVI or MPEG format, any of these movie formats, because there's not too much of a problem. However, very often, especially if you're going to render at larger sizes, such as I often do at 1920 1080, and you want a reasonably good quality render, each frame can take certainly several tens of seconds, if not minutes, to render, and therefore you don't want to get a few frames through it or even halfway through it and then render to crash or the power to go out in your house or whatever it is, because typically the movie files will no longer be usable. When you're doing a final render, certainly one that takes a long time to do, what most people who do a lot of it know to do is to use one of these still frame formats, such as one of these. I typically use PNG. It's fairly large format. It's not the most compressed, but it does have some compression on it, but it's a very good quality format. JPEG isn't as good quality, but will produce much smaller files, and Targa is quite huge as well. And there are some other formats in here too. If you're doing a final render, you would do a PNG and you would save it out to a set of files. So I'll just show you what that would look like. I have some files that I've created. I'll show you what you'll do, because you're going to end up with a folder full of still pictures. If you've got 250 frames in your animation, then you'll have 250 individual images, and what we need to do is to combine those into a single file. So if we come down here and we go to the video sequence editor, and then we add our image, start at frame 1 and we go up to frame 100 in this case. So as you can see, we can preview what the movie is going to look like, and we've got our video sequence down here, and we can also do things like adding sound. So if we go up to here, add sound, and I select a sound, we can decide where that sound is going to start. So I think my sound will start about there. Press G and move it back to where we want it, and then see what that's going to look like. And there we go. And my animation is running for about 100 frames, so I'll set the N to 100, very much like you would in a normal animation, and then just press play, and off it goes. And once you're happy with that, and you might have titles that you'll add in, there are certain effects that you can do as well using alpha channels and so on to fade things in and out. Once you're happy with the video that you've got, you can then render that out to a file. So you wouldn't obviously render it to another PNG, you'd then render that to one of these formats like AVI or H.264, which is what I typically use for YouTube, or MPEG or Xvid for a smaller file. So that's the basics of creating animation in Blender. I hope you found that useful. If there's any suggestions or requests for other tutorials, by all means just send me a message or say so in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thanks a lot.